Welcome to JTV. Agree or disagree, this is the place for you. We're heading to the Horn of Africa, specifically Somalia. Hope you enjoy.
For many people in the West, the name Somalia has come to be associated with the faces of the starving that are now so hauntingly familiar. This small piece of Africa has a fascinating past and a distinct culture. Sadly, so much of that has been obscured by the images of the famine and the relentless civil war. So what we do know about this country is that it is in the midst of much suffering. Our senior correspondent, Brian Stewart, is no stranger to Africa and its history. And tonight, to help us understand a little more about Somalia, he has prepared this background report.
How can history explain such apparent madness? In Somalia, warehouses full of food. Emergency food no one can move because of the roaming gangs of teenage gunmen. Then intervention from far away to save a country seemingly trying to kill itself.
It's now clear that military support is necessary to ensure the safe delivery of the food Somalis need to survive.
Civil war, warlords, famine, pirates. All images most commonly associated with Somalia in people's minds. The country, once labeled the Switzerland of Africa, has suffered a steady and tragic decline for decades. But beneath the prolonged suffering and chaos is a land rich in history and heritage, and a people struggling to maintain a semblance of normality in the absence of a state. In the Horn of Africa, Somalia is the continent's most easterly country. It has the longest coastline in mainland Africa, stretching more than 3,000 kilometers along the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Aden, and the Red Sea. Its location turned Somalia into a strategically important trading center in the ancient world. But the history of Somalia dates back much further, to some of the earliest human settlements in the world. These cave images of a life of herding in the Lasgil wall paintings in northwestern Somalia are estimated to date back between 3 and 6,000 years BCE. They're the first chapter in Somalia's now largely forgotten story.
We just know
known for being skinny and pirates. We're not known for having, a strong history, a strong culture. We're not known for the things that we know ourselves about. They're probably not even known by Somalis. You can walk around here and see the history of just this town itself. We have a very, very deep and long history that even Somalis are unaware of, and that's a shame, I think. If you look at the orange, and you say, well, this has sort of blemishes, okay? So it might not taste too well, so you can throw it away. But if you actually take the husk out, and you look, there are no blemishes inside, and it's sweet and juicy, okay? And so if you look at what has happened to the Somali people, the tragedy that has befallen them in the last 25 years or so, so these people are sort of a rubbish, okay? But if you go to Mogadishu, if you go to Hargeisa, if you go to Garawa, if you go to Kismaya, and you go to schools that ordinary people have put together, those young and women in those schools are more eager to learn than my students here at the University of Minnesota.
Somalia is emerging from a very long, difficult period, and we are now moving away from the chaos, instability, extremism, piracy to an era of peaceful and development.
Around 12 million Somalis, most of them herders, farmers, and fishermen, live in the country's 600,000 square kilometers. Despite being a member of the Arab League, Somalia's main language is Somali. The only Arabic speakers are people who studied the language or lived in Arab countries.
It always makes me very cross when I hear some official somewhere saying Syria is the next Somalia, or Libya is the next Somalia, or Aleppo is Mogadishu. You hear that. Somalia's become a catchword for the most disastrous, chaotic, violent, terrible state.
With the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, Somalia's strategic location became even more significant. Being at the intersection of Africa and Asia did not go unnoticed in the West. In 1884, the United States and 13 European countries met in Berlin, their aim to divide the African continent between them. They divided what we know as Somalia into 3 provinces, each ruled by a different European country. British Somalia, Italian Somalia, and French Somalia. The mainly Somali region of Ogaden was taken by the Ethiopian Empire and the NFD by Kenya.
The incredible thing about Somalia is that if you go way back in its history, it's always been either fought over or had foreign powers intervening in some way.
Both British and Italian Somalia gained independence in 1960. French Somalia voted to remain under French rule, despite accusations of ballot rigging, but later voted firmly for independence in 1977 and became Djibouti. The former British and Italian territories immediately united, forming Greater Somalia on the 1st of January 1960. Somalis elected Adam Abdullah Othman as the first president of the united country. He ruled for 7 years and was succeeded after a free and peaceful election by Abdul Rashid Ali Sharmarka. This was when Somalia's peace and stability earned it the nickname the Switzerland of Africa. However, corruption was rife and frustration began to mount. Sharmarka ruled for 2 years, but he was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards on the 15th of October 1969 and succeeded by Prime Minister Mukhtar Mohammad Hussein. He ruled for just 6 days before being overthrown in a military coup. It was led by General Siad Barre, who would be the dominant figure in Somalia for the next 2 decades. Somalia's experiment in democracy was over. The rifle, not the ballot box, would now govern the country. Barre dissolved parliament, suspended the constitution, banned political parties, arrested politicians, and limited press freedom.
We had only accepted the...
And then from that on, there was a downward trend in Somalia, everything, up to the end, up to the disintegration. And every time things were going down, the military regime was becoming more brutal and more dictator.
So people were arrested, properties were confiscated without compensation. Any ship that brings, material to Berbera, the materials on that ship were confiscated by the Siad Barre regime with no compensation. So things were getting worse and worse.
Barre's government was supported by the 2 superpowers of the day, the United States and the Soviet Union. It built the country's infrastructure and radically improved literacy. But in 1977, Barre made a move to take the Ogaden region, which was majority Somali, from his neighbor, Ethiopia.
I think what the Ogaden War was about was actually staking a claim to a more realistic border which did not comply with the colonial border. The colonial border was the line across the map. The real border was what the Somalis tried to establish. And of course you remember it was a very strange war because Siad Barre pretended that it was not a war being fought by the Somali army, but was being fought by the Western Somali Liberation Front, which didn't really exist at all. I mean, we went out to try and find the Western Somali Liberation Front, and we discovered, of course, that their tanks, their armored cars, were all Somali military vehicles with just a bit of paint on them saying WSLF. So the whole thing was a fiction. Of course, what was a fact was that the Somalis wanted their territory, wanted what was naturally, organically Somalia. But Siad Barre did not want to be seen to be fighting for that himself.
Jon Snow, News at 10, Jig Jigger.
Portion of the African continent where the Indian Ocean and the straits into the Red Sea come together on the northeast coastal corner of Africa. It's made up of the nations of Somalia, Ethiopia, and portions of Sudan and Kenya down here, as well as the small and independent state of Djibouti, which is located right there. Here, as well as the small and independent state of Djibouti, which is located right there. Now, as Robin said, there are 2 areas of warfare in the Horn going on right now. One is in the Eritrea area of Ethiopia, along the coast of the Red Sea. Now, this is where Eritrean guerrilla forces are fighting Ethiopian troops in the cause of Eritrean independence. Then over here, there's the bigger conflict in the Ogaden region of Ethiopia, between Ethiopia and Somalia. And latest reports have the Somalis occupying most of this entire Ogaden region. Robin?
The present Somali nation was created in 1960 by merging 2 former colonies, Italian Somalia and British Somaliland. That left large numbers of Muslim Somali tribesmen living in Christian Ethiopia and Kenya. That set off a Somali drive to expand the borders to what they considered the real or greater Somalia. The current Somali advance into Ethiopia is part of that drive. The United States was friendly to Somalia, but cut off aid in 1971 because the Somalis were trading with North Vietnam. The Russians stepped in and supplied arms and military training. In return, the Soviets got the use of the Red Sea port, Berbera, which they began to develop for the use of the growing Soviet Navy. Then last summer, the Somalis used their strong, Soviet-trained army to support an attack on Ethiopia. But what the Somalis found was that the Soviets were also helping the Ethiopians with military aid. The Somalis felt double-crossed and kicked the Soviets out of the country and out of the port of Berbera. Then the Somalis asked Washington for aid. So far, they haven't got it. The Somali ambassador to the United Nations is Abdirazak Haji Hussein, a former prime minister of Somalia. Mr. Ambassador, what is the military situation now? Are we correct in saying, as Jim did, that Somali forces are far inside the Ogaden?
It's not correct that the Somali regular forces are far inside the disputed area.
Not regular forces?
Not regular forces. What are there is the forces, the indigenous liberation movement of the territory. Of course, the Somali Democratic Republic is, as we said several times, and I would like to repeat it again here, is that we are supporting morally and materially this liberation movement of the territory, which we believe it is in keeping with the general principle of the United Nations Charter as well as the Organization of African Unity Charter.
We have another map. Have you got the other map that that shows the close-up here of the corner? Roughly how far inside this are these indigenous forces and your troops who are supporting them?
Well, the liberation movements, according to information available to us so far, is almost on the verge of the city of Harar. And they have already succeeded in liberating the major part of the territory, of their territory. And I think that if it were not because of the intervention, military intervention on the part of the Soviet Union, by now they would have been able to regain their complete and total victory.
Which you consider the part of Greater Somalia, the real Somalia, which exists inside the present Ethiopia.
Well, you know, we have never, this word Greater Somalia has never been a child of Somalia. What we have said instead, right from the beginning, was and still is the right of the Somali Union, Somali people to be reunited.
I see. Do you expect, because of the Soviet aid and the buildup of that aid to Ethiopia, which you've just referred to, does your country expect an Ethiopian counterattack now on your country?
Of course, we are expecting, and we have alerted the world and warned from the mouth of my president about 2 weeks ago that according to information available to us, this kind of invasion against Somalia could be expected any moment from now.
Have you, is your request for American aid still in Washington? Is it still outstanding? Have you renewed it?
As far as we are concerned, yes, it is still outstanding.
And what answer have you got so far?
Well, so far we did not have any definite answer, but we hear through the news media that the United States of America is still reluctant
to
return on its original decision.
I see. When you, to put it crudely, asked the Soviet forces to leave, did you do so with any understanding that there would be American aid?
Not at all.
You did not?
No, we didn't.
But you believe that you were promised American aid up last summer, I believe. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say so. The only thing we have had was that there was a promise that defensive military assistance will be given to Somalia. There was no time limit and there was no other conditions.
From this administration?
From this administration.
I see.
From this administration. And as a matter of fact, it had been publicized that the United States government is quite willing to give Somalia military assistance for defensive purposes.
I have one more
But
question.
this was not the basis of our, we have never had any, this was not the basis of, for example, of expelling the Soviet Union from Somalia. It has nothing to do. They were two completely different and separate things.
All right, we'll come back to this. Thank you. Jim?
All right, now to the situation as far as Ethiopia is concerned. The irony of it all is that from the end of World War II until 1974, Ethiopia was one of the United States' staunchest allies in Africa. There was a close relationship with the well-known Ethiopia leader, Haile Selassie, the Lion of Judah, as he called himself. During Selassie's reign, half of all U.S. foreign aid to Africa went to Ethiopia. But Selassie was deposed in 1974, and an army-led coup established a Marxist-oriented government. The new government became friendly with the Soviet Union and increasingly hostile toward the United States. Last April, the United States stopped all military aid to Ethiopia. Most U.S. officials were then forced to leave the country. The ties to the Soviet Union were thus strengthened. Soviet weapons and military advisors, along with Cubans, came to Ethiopia, and this support was stepped up considerably after the Ethiopians found themselves on the losing end, both in Eritrea and in the Ogaden region against Somalia. There's some dispute about it, but the best intelligence sources estimate that there are some 3,000 Soviet and Cuban military advisors now in Ethiopia. The word is, as the ambassador just said, that the Ethiopian plan is to soon launch a major counteroffensive to win back Ogaden. Today, the leader of the Ethiopian government accused President Carter of coordinating an international plot to arm Somalia and put the Horn of Africa under anti-Ethiopian forces. Well, Congressman Don Bonker, Democrat from the state of Washington, just returned from a fact-finding tour of the Horn of Africa. He and Congressman Paul Sangus met with Ethiopian leaders. Both are members of the House International Affairs Committee, and their written report on their trip says the potential for violence and instability is great in the Horn of Africa. They gave that same message to President Carter last week at a White House meeting. Congressman, first, what is the basic Ethiopian view of the fighting in the Ogaden region against Somalia?
Well, the Ethiopians view this with understandable alarm because it represents a possible dismemberment of their nation. They feel that the Somalis invaded in the Ogaden. These are internationally recognized borders, and in 1964 the OAU indeed recognized all of the borders in Africa. So when the Somalis attacked, they could only do what would be expected of any nation, and that's move to protect their own territory.
They don't see it as an indigenous move for independence as the ambassador just portrayed it.
Well, that's one of the problems, Jim, with all of the areas of Africa. There are Somali inhabitants in that area, and but it happens to be inside Ethiopia. And I just don't believe that that the Ethiopians are going to allow their country to be carved up. Now, one can say that while all of the African leaders support fully Ethiopia's case in the conflict over the Ogaden, there is understandable concern over Russian motives and intentions in that area and the supply of such massive amounts of Soviet equipment to the Ethiopians.
All right, now that brings me to my next question, Congressman, about Ethiopia. The Somalians have charged in the past, and others have suggested, that Ethiopia is now, to put it bluntly, under the thumb of the Soviet Union. Did you find that to be the case when you were there?
I think one could make a good case for that, not only with the massive supplies that we saw actually when we were in Ethiopia. In fact, we were delayed 2 days because of a disabled Soviet airplane on the runway. We also understand that there has been a new commission established that's representative of the Ethiopians, the Russians, and the Cubans. And the Russians and Cubans outnumber the Ethiopians. So I think that they will continue to assert influence and growing influence over military and political decisions in that country.
All right. Military decisions. The ambassador said, and I said also a moment ago, and it's been well reported, that the Ethiopians are planning a counterattack in that Ogaden region to get that land back. There's no question in your mind, is there, that that's going to happen?
I think that's going to happen, but I think one must look carefully at the map. It's almost militarily impossible to clear the entire area of the Somalis. So they'll probably concentrate their attack in the north, in Harar, and possibly move beyond the Somali border to capture Hargeisa and possibly Berbera. That would be for strategic reasons, because if they can succeed in doing that, then perhaps they can negotiate with the Somalis to have them clear out the entire Ogaden region. But militarily, it's impossible to take a total front and succeed in that area.
Well, it's not. The crucial question here is, if assuming there is a counterattack, and assuming that the Ethiopians have been well supplied with Russian arms and other kinds of support, and assuming that they can whip the Somalians in that area, it doesn't then the question become whether or not they will in fact stop at their own border. I mean, for instance, if they're able to, one way or another, get this land, this is the Ogaden region, if they're able to get that back and regain control of it, then the question, are they going to continue going into Somalia, and are we going to have a real war on our hands? You talked to the Ethiopian leaders about that. What did they tell you?
Well, we asked Colonel Mengistu, who's head of the DIRG.
And the DIRG is the ruling body of Ethiopia.
That's correct. And he said that he had no intention of moving beyond the border. He also said that he didn't want to make the same mistakes that the Somalis made. And we also met with the Russian ambassador.
Same mistake to Somalia. What do you mean by that?
By invading another country.
By going in there in the first place. Yeah.
Right. And we also asked that of the Russian ambassador to Ethiopia. And he said his country would not sponsor such an initiative. But again, I think that's the only way that the Ethiopians are going to regain their entire area. And should they move beyond that line, then that adds a new dimension to the conflict, and it'll quickly spread not only throughout northern Africa, but the Middle East as well.
Is a name which has unfortunately become synonymous with failed state. It's a nation with extremely high levels of poverty, one whose government is barely existent, and notably it's a country racked with violence. But how did this come to be? Why did Somalia fail? So, as of 1945, Somalia, like most of Africa, was under European control. It was divided into two areas, British Somaliland in the north and Somalia to the south and east. This was also run by Britain at this point, who had taken it from Italy in the Second World War. Now, Britain's first instinct was to ask the brand new UN, maybe we could keep it, but the Somali people were pretty sick of Europeans, and the UN said no. And thus, it was run by the British, who allowed for the establishment of political parties, and under orders from the UN, it was passed back to Italy in 1950. On the sole condition that they give it independence within 10 years. And in 1960, both the British and Italian Somalilands were given independence, and very soon afterwards they united into the Somali Republic. At first, the Republic functioned well. The people of Somalia had free elections, freedom of speech, and the economy was growing. However, there were two major issues which plagued the Somali Republic. The first was that politics was dominated by the deeply entrenched clan system, and as a result became fairly partisan. And the second was the idea of Greater Somalia. These lands were home to some and often a majority Somali population, and many in government were divided on whether or not to push for territorial expansion or to simply let things lie. This question wouldn't get answered anytime soon, since this was the Cold War, and 1969 meant that it was time for a communist revolution. A man called Mohammed Siad Barre, with the help of some of the army, seized control of the country and began to implement wide-sweeping reforms. Things were going pretty well, right? Well, yes, except for the fact that Bahrain had a clever idea in 1977, let's invade Ethiopia. Specifically to gain this region called the Ogaden and incorporate it and the Somalis living there into Somalia proper. And with the help of the USSR, it would be simple. Or at least that it would have been, barring the fact that the Soviet Union didn't approve and so aided Ethiopia along with a large number of Cuban troops. The war went poorly for Somalia, and by 1978 it had lost, and many Somalis living in eastern Ethiopia fled for Somalia. Within the space of a year, Somalia's population went from just under 4 million to over 5 million. And as you'll have guessed, this caused issues with infrastructure and food supply, and the national humiliation of losing a war caused major discontent in Bahrain's regime. There was an attempted coup and a harsh crackdown that followed, in which Bahrain focused on certain clans. To make matters worse, Somalia's food and water supply had begun to collapse, and so it was reliant on foreign aid, which Bahrain only gave to clans which supported him. Over the course of the 1980s, Somalia grew worse. The economy entered freefall, and Bahrain's government became much more brutal in suppressing any challenge to its authority. This led to growing armed resistance by the sidelined clans, and by 1990, civil war. Most of Somalia fell to the rebels pretty quickly, and by 1991 Bahrain had fled the country, never to return, and also northern lands here declared independence of the Republic of Somaliland. And whilst many clans had put aside their differences to oust Bahrain, now that he was gone, there was nothing keeping them together, and so, civil war. Again. Or still. As you all know, things didn't get much better after this. American and UN intervention did nothing to help, and Somalia's state only got worse. Law and order had completely broken down, meaning jobs that provided food were no longer safe and meant controlling aid was the quickest route to power, meaning that Somalia was never given the opportunity to get back on its feet. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching with us.
And here's Somalia. Now let's take a look, shall we? Stamped smack on the Horn of Africa, the land of Somalia has been inhabited for eons. It is believed Somalia was the location of the land of Punt, mentioned in the writings of ancient Egypt, a region abundant with gold, ebony, ivory, and incense. Somalia's commercial importance continued through Greek and Roman times, and in the 7th century, the religion of Islam was introduced by the Arabs, which would become the country's chief faith. The late medieval era saw the rise of the powerful Adal Sultanate, which, under the leadership of the Imam Ahmed here, fought and conquered Ethiopia with the help of Ottoman guns. This was the high point, but it hurtled downhill afterwards, as the Ethiopians, furious at the destructive invasion, fought back with Portuguese support and defeated the Imam in this battle. Adal subsequently unraveled, after being overwhelmed by incursions of Oromo tribes. To the south, meanwhile, was the Ajuran Sultanate, which acquired great wealth and influence as a trading power, establishing ties as far away as Ming Dynasty China. Here's a Chinese gentleman gazing with admiration at a Somali giraffe. Then it declined, as all states do, and a patchwork of others arose, including this one, Geledi. Again, mercantile riches and a heavy dependence on slave labor. Basically, the Somali lands were not united, and this would cause problems, as we'll soon discover. In 1884, the British established the Somaliland Protectorate with the permission of local clan chiefs, in order to better police the crucial waters of international trade. The Italians, meanwhile, were eager to copy the European powers and their colonizing ways, and thus set up their own pocket of rule in Somalia in 1889. The Italians were actually invited in by this Somali sultan, who hoped for Italian aid in vanquishing his rival, who was also his cousin. Doesn't look very happy, does he? Similarly unhappy was the poet Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, who disliked the Europeans as much as he disliked Ethiopians. He led the dervish movement against the colonizers, winning land and battles and pushing the British back to the coast. And there they stayed until they got some free time after World War I, when they launched a final crushing blow against the dervish with an aircraft assault in 1920. Meanwhile, fascist Italy under Mussolini was investing quite a lot into the development of its Somali territory, and after invading Ethiopia, went after British Somaliland during World War II and took it. Thus, Italian East Africa reached its greatest extent. But it didn't last long. Britain fought back and took control of all Somalia, including the Italian bit, and held on to it after the war ended. In 1960, both parts were joined together to become the independent Somali Republic. The divisions between the two regions were quickly apparent. The British had largely permitted the traditional Somali method of governance to continue whilst under its rule, whereas the Italians had imposed Western-style methods, which did not mesh well with the way things were done over here. Amidst all the suspicion and frustration, the president was assassinated, and a military coup followed, and a military dictatorship followed that. Aiming to achieve more land for a greater Somalia, an invasion of Ethiopian territory commenced in 1977, the Somalis winning battles and gaining a lot of ground. But the Ethiopians fought hard to prevent further losses. Fidel Castro of Cuba supported Ethiopia and sent thousands of troops to help, and the Somalis were pushed back and the war ended. The Somali people were naturally upset at the government's failure to enlarge the nation's borders, and their many other grievances were thereafter accentuated. Things got worse and worse, and at last tumbled into internal conflict. The section of Somalia that the British had previously administered began a war of independence. Horror followed, but the ruthless exertions of the government failed to quash the spirit of the region, which declared independence as Somaliland in 1991. No one in the world recognizes it as a sovereign country, however, except Taiwan. Then the Somali government was overthrown and a civil war arose. By 1992, things had become so chaotic and so dreadful that the UN got involved to calm things down and deliver humanitarian aid. The second part of the operation involved the trickier task of trying to stabilize the government and implement democracy. It failed. Outside intervention was resented, and it collapsed after the Battle of Mogadishu, which was portrayed in the movie Black Hawk Down, a film that did not include any actual Somali actors. The UN forces departed after hundreds of UN troop casualties and thousands of Somali casualties, and the civil war raged on. Then more conflict and the growth of the extremist group Al-Shabaab, which concerned Kenya, which stepped in to fight them. And then the Somali military, African Union, and USA joined forces to tackle the insurgents in 2014. Somalia today has one of the lowest levels of human development in the world, which is what decades of war and political volatility will do, and it is going to take a lot of work and patience to get things going better. Hopefully happier days await Somalia, but till then, it's bye from me for now. Bye-bye!
maanta waa maalin qiimo gaar ah u leh baarlamaanka Soomaaliyeed. waxaa si daba joog ah u imaanaya haween fara badan. guriga waxaa hortaagan kuwa kale ee soo dhaweyn ka sameynaya. rag badanna waa lagu soo dhaweynayaa, kuwaasoo ah mas'uuliyiin ka tirsan hay'adaha dawladda iyo ururada caalamiga, dhaqaatiir, culimaawidiin, macallimiin, madax ka tirsan safaaradaha dawlado kala duwan ee Afrika iyo qaarado kale. waxaa goordhow furmi doona seminar caalamiyeedkii ugu horreeyay ee lagaga doodi doono gudniinka gabdhaha iyo habkii wax looga bedeli lahaa. seminaarka waxaa soo qaban qaabiyey ururka dimuqraatiga haweenka Soomaaliyeed, wuxuuna ka mid yahay ololaha warganineed ee lagaga hortagayo gudniinka gabdhaha, iyadoo lala kaashanayo kaalinta farsamo dhaqaale ee ururka horumarinta haweenka Talyaaniga ee AIDOS.
Today, in this conference hall, we are attending a historical seminar, which is the first of its kind, on female circumcision, strategies to bring about changes.
ururka dimuqraadiga haweenka Soomaaliyeed munaasabaddan soo agaabilay amaan noqdaan wufuud kala duwan oo ka timid dalalka saaxiibka ah.
dowladda Soomaaliyeed taageero weyn ayay siisay hirgelinta barnaamijkan. waxaa daliil ka ah ka soo qaybgalka seminaarka xoghaye ku-xigeenka kaaliyaha xoghayaha guud ee Jamhuuriyadda Dimuqraatiga Soomaaliyeed Jaalle Cabdulqaadir Xaaji Maxamed. waxaa ugu horreyn seminaarka hadal ka soo jeediyey wasiirka caafimaadka Dr. Maxamed Cali Munassar, wuxuuna hadalkiisa ku furay mowduuca shirka.
mushkilad xasaasi ah oo dhibaato caafimaad iyo bulshada xambaarsan. haddaba gudniinka guud ahaan laba aan kala saaro, kan wiilasha iyo kan gabdhaha, dhakhtar sameeyo ama kaalin dhakhtar oo khibrad u leh. waayo cudurro wiilasha iyo ragga ku dhaca ayaa gudniinka looga hortagaa ama lagu daaweeyaa. marka waxaan leeyahay gudniinka wiilasha waa hab daaweyn oo isbitaallada ay furan yihiin gabadha uguma jiraan. go-aankeeda waxaa iskale waalidka oo aan fahmin weli danta asaga iyo ubadkiisa ugu jirto. dhibaatooyinka uu xambaarsan yahay gudniinka fircooniga ah waa arrinta hortaada shirka caalamiga ah laguna falanqeeyo.
gudoomiyaha ururka dimuqraatiga haweenka Soomaaliyeed xildhibaan Muraaye Garaad Axmed khudbadeeda waxay ku soo dhaweysay ka soo qaybgalayaasha hadallo dhiirigelin ah uguna hambalyeysay howlgal wacan. arrinta dumarka kaliya ayay qusaysay.
Many of us come have a background in
gudniinka gabdhaha waa mushaakil aanan gaar u ahayn Soomaaliya. waxaa la ogaaday 80 malyan haweenka qaaradda Afrika inay u gudan yihiin noocyada kala duwan ee uu u qaybsamo. sidaa awgeed waxaa seminaarka ka soo qayb galay madax ka kala socota wadamo kala duwan si ay oola dirsaan haweenka Soomaaliyeed dhibaatooyinka gudniinka una gudbiyaan habkii lagula dagaalami lahaa wadamadooda. waxaa hadalka qaadatay Berane Rasword, gudoomiyaha urur dhexaadka Afrika ee la dagaalama sancooyinka la xiriira dhaqanka ee waxyeello u geysta caafimaadka haweenka. ururka waxaa la abuuray 1984, fadhigiisuna waa Addis Ababa. wuxuu abaabulaa taageeraa fikradaha dawladaha Afrika ee ka soo horjeeda sancooyinka halista ah ee haweenka lagu sameeyo. inta ugu badan qabiilada ka soo qayb galay shirka waxay ka tirsan yihiin ururka. faarax oo ah agaasimaha mashruuca hadal ay ka soo jeedisay waxay tiri waxaan ku faraxsanahay xiisaha mawduuca ay siinayaan dowladaha dhibaatada tan inala wadaaga iyagoo kaalin ka haysta ururada caalamiga si loogu helo xal mashaakilka gudniinka gabdhaha waxaa la ogaaday in dhaqamada gaboobay sida gudniinka uu yahay mid eel ku reebta caafimaadka dumarka mid jireed iyo dhimireedba maxaa yeelay wuxuu sababi karaa qofkii oo geeriyooda mise hadal reebta argagax awgiis psychological and emotional damages. Maxay yihiin dhibaatooyinka gudniinka uu ku reebto dumarka si gaar ahaan midka laga isticmaalo Soomaaliya oo loo yaqaan gudniinka tolan haweena ay ka tirsan akademiyada cilmiga iyo fanka ayaa cilmi baaris sanooyin badan ka sameynaya si ay u darsaan dhibaatooyinka la xiriira sancadatan Dr. Faadumo Xaaji Maxamed waxay inooga warrami doontaa waxyeelooyinka gudniinka uu u geysto caafimaadka haweenka
wuxuu leeyahay dhibaatooyin caafimaad aad u fara badan dhibaatooyinka aan u kala saarno marka gudniinka gabadha lagu sameeyo oo ah dhiigbax kaadidu ku cishoonta iyadoo teetana ku dhaco iyadoo dhaawaca ku hurgumo ayaa naxdin iyo cabsi ay ka qaado gudniinka tan labaad waxa waaye gabadha markay korto ay caadadii ay bilowdo inay hesho caadadii oo gabadha ku cishoonto mindhicir xanuun iyo gumaar xanuun oo ku dhaco kaliya xanuun oo ku dhaco intaasoo dhan gudniinka iyo u sabab ah waxaa kaloo jirto gabadha markay aroosto marka habeenka hore guriga loo geeyo ninkii aroosay dhibaato ay kala kulmaan iyada iyo ninkaba si meesha maaragto uu u dhici lahaa kulanka caadiga ahaa sidaa darteeda marmarka qaarkood waxaa dhacdo hadduu odayga uu keeni waayo in uu gooyo inuu asaga wax u qaato uu ku gooyo ama dhalo ama midi ama wax af leh haddii kale waxa qaarkood dadka caqliga la weliba waxay yeelaan qof caafimaad u yeertaan sida gabadhi loogu ballaariyo ibti tan kale oo ka iman karta waxa waaye bura ka soo baxdo meesha la guday oo la yiraahdo burada malmalowga taas oo ayadana dhibaatooyin badan u keeni karta oo xataa marmarka qaarkood raggii naagta qabay haddii weynaato buradaas uu diidi karo oo ayadana qasab tahay in la geeyo isbitaalkii oo la seexiyo si loo qalaa dhibaatooyinka kala gudniinka uu leeyahay waxa waaye gabadha markay uur yeelato ay dhalayso dhalmadaasayta oo dhibaato ka iman karto sababta waxa waaye meesha ciriiriga oo ilmaha madaxiisa uu soo maraynin waxaa dhici karta waqti badan inuu ku raagaa saas darteed waxaa dhacayso in dilaacu gabadhi gaaro hoos u gaaro in uu maaragtay kaada haysti iyo saxarada dhinaceeda ay soo dabcaan in uu maaragtay cunugii madaxiisi meesha uu ku raagaa marka raagidaas uu meesha ku raagaayana uu ku sameeyaa dalool xagga kaadida oo gabadhi kaadida cishin weyso ama xagga saxarada oo meeshaana dalool intuu ku sameysmo saxarada kasoo baxda saxaaxa gudihiisa tan kale waxa waaye ilmaha dhalanaya laftooda ciriirigaas uu soo maraya dhaawac weyn ayuu u geyn karaa asagoo wuxuu soo bixi karaa suuxsan ama marmarka qaarkood asagoo dhintay intaasna waxaa keeni kara dhibaatooyinka oo gudniinka waa gabdhahayn in laga daaya
Although we have learned to adjust to both superpowers, we have our own way of doing things in Somalia. The government that came to power in 1969 decided to promote Somalia's development through scientific socialism, which is a pragmatic blend of Marxist and Islamic principles. It promised to radically change the lives of everyone, especially the children, who are not only encouraged to sing revolutionary songs, but were recruited into learning new skills that would help us all build a better Somalia. In Somalia, our history has always been passed down by word of mouth from poet to poet. In 1972, our government finally created a written language. Everyone was involved, and during the National Literacy and Rural Development Campaign, The schools were closed down and the students became teachers. They roamed throughout the country, especially on the lookout for rural and nomadic families. Our government's program to create a modern Somalia officially recognized the special contribution that women could and should make. The Revolutionary Family Law of 1975 gave them equal rights. In our National Dance Theatre in Mogadishu began life in a nomad camp. Now they are eager to step out in a new way of life, and the family law will allow them to look for a partner on equal terms. Somalia, a hot, dry country. The people of Somalia respect this harsh terrain and sustain life from its meager resources. What seems barren to outsiders, the Somalis regard as a blessed land teeming with camel herds. Somalia belongs to its people. Its pastures are a gift from God to all Somalis. Somalia straddles the Red Sea and Indian Ocean in the northeast corner of Africa. This is the Horn of Africa, the biblical land of frankincense and myrrh at the crossroads of Africa and the Middle East. There are 4 million Somalis and 6 million camels in Somalia. Over half of these people are nomads, the rest farmers and city dwellers. It is a country of contrasts. Until 1972, the Somali language was unwritten. But words have always been at the heart of the culture.
In a land where breath comes hard and no fresh breezes blow, when daylight comes and the dust rises, the distant roar belongs to the hungry lion, and the battle belongs to the valiant. But the scorching flame of heat, it belongs to the parching wind.
Somalia is a nation of poets. They use the rhythms of nature and the colors of the land to relate the history of a country often racked by outside forces. In the late 19th century,
When European powers partitioned most of Africa, they recognized the Horn of Africa for its strategic importance. So these outsiders staked claims to it, leaving these monuments as stone symbols of a colonial past. In the Horn, Britain, Italy, and France joined the ancient African empire of Ethiopia in dividing up vital Somali grazing lands. For Somalia, the time is ripe for someone to lead this nomadic society, suddenly faced with intruders intent on colonizing them. Somalis are a religious people. As Muslims who believe themselves descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, it is fitting that the leader who steps forward is a Muslim teacher named Muhammad Abdullah Hassan. In 1895, Muhammad Abdullah Hassan returns to Somalia from the holy city of Mecca, bringing with him a clear vision of the power of simple faith. He is considered a Sayyid, or Holy One. On arrival, he resists an English officer who has demanded an entry tax. In a struggle, the Englishman falls off the pier. The belligerent Somali is not arrested, but is simply dismissed as being mad. The Sayyid starts denouncing his countrymen who cooperate with such colonial authorities, urging all Somalis to work together as Muslims.
If the land is your land, why aren't you its government? If Islam is your religion, why do you submit to infidel overlords?
His message inspires many to join him. They become the dervishes, a movement of devout Muslims dedicating their lives to the service of God and community. Their units repel Ethiopian soldiers who have plundered Somali villages. In 1899, the British receive a defiant letter from the Sayyid, challenging their very presence.
Now choose for yourselves. If you want war, we accept it. But if you want peace, you must pay us a protective tax.
Relations deteriorate. Britain proclaims the Sayyid to be a rebel of the empire. To the imperialist mind, his rejection of colonialism confirms his madness. Sayyid Mohammed is henceforth branded the Mad Mullah. The colonialist armies join together to break his resistance. The British mount numerous expeditions against the Somali dervishes, mobilizing a multinational force of Asians, Europeans, and other Africans. Both sides suffer heavy casualties. A stalemate results. The Mad Mullah makes headlines in Britain. The Sayyid addresses an open letter to the English people.
I wish to rule my own country and protect my own religion. We have both suffered in battle. I have no forts, no houses, no cultivated fields, no silver or gold for you to take. All you can get from me is war, nothing else. If you wish peace, go away from my country to your own.
Sayyid Mohammed's dervish army continues to grow and soon numbers 10,000 men and women, all trained to ride and to shoot. The war-weary Italians and British negotiate a ceasefire with the Sayyid, allowing his dervishes a territory in the interior. They regroup and create councils to advise the guerrilla army and its civilian supporters. In 1910, Britain reluctantly withdraws her forces to the northern coast. Before leaving, arms are distributed to so-called friendly clans, thereby reigniting old rivalries. The British quickly realized their withdrawal was a mistake. They create a camel corps to patrol coastal areas. In 1913, its commander, Captain Richard Corfield, disobeys orders and leads an attack against the dervishes. Corfield is killed, his forces annihilated. Sayyid Mohammed commemorated the dervish victory with a poem.
You have died, Corfield, and are no longer in this world. A merciless journey was your portion. In that other world, tell your companions how God tried you, and say how the dervishes were like thunderbolts of a storm, rumbling and roaring.
The dervishes abandoned their guerrilla tactics, building a network of fortresses to establish the territory of their state. This political strategy makes them immobile. Military roles are reversed. The dervish structures become fixed targets. After World War I, the British vowed to crush the Saids movement quickly and economically. In 1920, a major expedition combining air, ground, and naval forces is dispatched to Africa with the Air Force in command. For the first time in history, air power will determine military strategy. Air Vice Marshal John Gray remembers.
In previous encounters with the British, he'd always had the advantage of extreme mobility. He could move about that country so easily and quickly. The aeroplane reversed that, and we had the initiative, which was quite a new thing.
The target is the dervish headquarters at Calais.
We got the Medwala bottled up in this port and bombed it. I think we did probably a fair amount of damage.
The Said curses the planes.
Vultures hovering over my head, eager to dip their filthy beaks into my body.
Anyway, the Mad Mullah was not so easily caught. He waited for a few days. He watched what was going on around him. He noticed that the Camel Corps watered their camels early every morning, and their horses. And whilst they were busily engaged in doing this one morning, he and about 30 of his head men on ponies escaped out to the other side of the fort and made a dash for it. So that was the end, really the end of the little war.
So the dervish troops had been dispersed, and the forts were left in ruins. That so-called Little War had laid the foundation for the modern Somali state and established Said Mohammed as its father. Said Mohammed articulated Somali beliefs with a poetic power that inspired his people. Today, at the National Theatre, dervish history is reenacted.
Wonderful. Cool.
For Somalis, poetry is a public art, the expression of their culture, valued above all else. At the National Academy, scholars transcribe poetry, stories, and proverbs composed years ago. This project is especially important since Somalia adopted the Latin alphabet for its language just in 1972. Poems which for generations were known only by heart can now be preserved in the written Somali script. That language is also used for public administration, law, and especially education, where great changes have occurred in recent years. Despite some opposition within this patriarchal society, many girls now seek formal education.
Wonderful, isn't it?
But they still encounter difficulties. Dahabo Farah is a dean at the Somali National University.
In the Somali society, it's very important for a woman to get married because it's very difficult for a woman to live as an independent person. There is this pressure, and they are not encouraged generally to, be educated.
Adequate medical care is a problem for all Somalis, men and women alike. This This is Benadir Hospital, Somalia's maternity and pediatric center. The government of Somalia has stated its strong commitment to eliminating human affliction. However, in a country with a difficult environment, inadequate nutrition, and insufficient health care, disease is widespread. Dr. Mohammed Wassame is the director of the Benadir Hospital.
And the problem for women, like other countries, is women pregnant, mostly they are suffering anemia, malnutrition, high blood pressures, and eclampsia. It's a common problem which we have.
The infant mortality rate is high. Even though much progress has been made, with the help of the doctors of many nationalities who work here, and the extent of medical care now reaches beyond city limits, Somalia still faces enormous medical problems. Custom which affects all Somali women. It is a radical form of female circumcision called infibulation. For centuries it was accepted as a female initiation rite, performed to assure virginity and fidelity. But it is now recognized how this practice has been used to subjugate women and maintain their subservient role in society. It is now challenged by socially conscious Somali women, unwilling to accept submissive roles. Somali men also support this effort. As a father, Abdul Qadir Noor is committed to eliminating this controversial practice.
My wife is insisting very much that I must circumcise all my children, and that I will not accept. This is very much the biggest problem I'm facing from my family, and especially from my wife and my sisters, and I think this is going to be a war that is going to continue for a very long time, but I'm sure I'll win it.
Rakia Haji Duale heads the Somali Women's Organization and has written an important study on infibulation.
Without circumcision, the girl will not be accepted by the society. And mothers and grandmothers, out of firm belief on the physical and moral benefits of the operation, they do it on their girls, because it's the only thing which can guarantee the girl's economic and social and marriage security.
hase yeeshee culumadii iyo qorayaasha intooda badani waxay isku raaceen inuu ka bilowday masarkii hore ee faraacinadii.
The Somali Women's Organization has begun an education campaign to persuade women to abandon this harmful custom.
Lagu arkay iyadoo arrintaas looga gol lahaa.
We don't like forums to criticize or to interfere in this female circumcision issue, because it's a Somali problem, and we as Somalis, we are aware and we know this is a serious problem in our country, and we have the ability and we are ready to do something about it.
Somalis have a strong sense of themselves as a people. Unlike most African countries, Somalia is a homogeneous nation whose people speak the same language, share the same culture, and practice the same religion, Islam.
غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.